Hi everyone, I'm Matt Williams. I am a tutor in politics and Access Fellow here at the University of Oxford. I am just here beside the magnificent Bodleian Library, and on the ground floor here, the Divinity School. This may look a little bit like Hogwarts, and that's quite appropriate because in fact it was used to film some of the scenes from the Harry Potter films, specifically the Goblet Ball in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Anyway, on the other side over here, we've got the Sheldonian Theater. Now this is where we hold big events, things like graduation. So what actually happens for most students when they finish their degrees is that they go in to the Divinity School, they pick up a gown, and then they walk across here, and then they go into the Sheldonian Theatre, and they get given their degree, usually by the Chancellor or the Vice Chancellor of the university. So that is the procession that all Oxford graduates in the modern era have taken. So if you can think of anyone famous who's graduated from Oxford, so that would include Stephen Hawking for his first degree, that would include Mr. Bean, Rowan Atkinson, that would include Felicity Jones, the actress, that would include all sorts of characters. Anyway, they've all done that procession across this particular courtyard in this magnificent setting. Now, the question I want to think about today is, well, how did they get into that position? How do you become someone that is admitted to a university that is highly competitive for its places, and then persevere all the way to the end to obtain your degree at the end of it? Well, there's a few factors, not least of which must include a bit of luck. People that end up being admitted to these universities have often had a few things tilted in their favour that they haven't really had a huge amount of control of. But perhaps more importantly is hard work, hard graft, discipline. And so that begs certain questions about, well, how can we potentially develop our self-discipline and obtain that sort of consistent level of sustained effort? Are there certain tricks to it, or are we basically sort of genetically determined to have a certain sort of work capacity? Well, there are certainly some genetic components to the story. There are, for example, bits of evidence that young men in particular have difficulties with impulse control to a greater extent than young women, and that just simply as a product of age, that impulse control gets under control. There are certain neurological changes as we mature, where certain parts of our brain effectively get the neurons effectively sort of disappear and the connections disappear, and some of that impulsiveness of youth starts to shed off, and therefore the capacity for delayed gratification, in other words, not seeking some immediate dopamine return, but waiting and putting in long hours of sometimes difficult effort in order to obtain a particularly complicated outcome, becomes a lot more realistic and manageable. So there are genetic and neurological components to it that are effectively beyond anyone's control. But there are also habits that can affect your capacity to work hard and to be disciplined. And I think one of the most important is to set realistic goals. And the second is to reconceptualize what work even means. So first of all, with regards to setting realistic goals, sometimes it can be difficult to even start down the path towards getting to this journey from divinity schools to Sheldonian Theatre, because it just seems so daunting. It's such an enormous marathon to run. Where's the first step? How do you even get going on a task like that? And so one way to do that is to set realistic and manageable goals, or SMART goals as they're sometimes called. Those are goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. For example, I'm pushing myself through writing a book at the moment, and it's really difficult. And there have been plenty of occasions when I thought, oh, I'm going to quit. This is too hard, and I'm not sure it's worth it. So I decided to come up with smarter goals. I said to myself, I'm going to write 1.5 hours every day on the book. And that's a realistic, measurable, specific, attainable, relevant, and time-bound goal. And I'm getting through it step by step. And that sense of delaying gratification is much easier to cope with because I've got these sort of step-by-step, bite-sized points towards achieving my ultimate goal, which is something that I want to do. So by breaking down an enormous project into something much more manageable and bite-sized and planning it better, I've been better able to get through the material. So that's one thing, is sort of setting easily manageable, realistic goals and having a good plan as to how you're going to do this, frankly, quite difficult work. The second component I mentioned was reconceptualizing work itself. Now, the problem with a term like work is that it can risk being somewhat alienating, meaning that if you say you're working, to use a bit of Marxist theory, you could feel like you're working on somebody else's behalf, that you're doing the work in order for someone to be proud of you, or in order for you to get a job and be paid by an employer, or you're just somehow not doing it for yourself, but you're doing its labor on somebody else's behalf. If you reconceptualize it as something like study or learning, then all of a sudden the very same activities appear a lot more self-oriented, much more selfish. Not selfish in a bad sort of self-regarding, unkind way, but selfish in the sense of you're doing it for yourself. You're doing it because you want to take this journey to be able to walk from divinity schools to the Sheldonian Theater one day. You're doing it for yourself, not for somebody else. Now, this may sound like a fairly trite and unhelpful conceptual point, but I think it makes quite a big difference. The way we frame in our own minds what our activities are and what they're for can actually have a tremendous impact on our likelihood of performing those tasks in the first place. If, for example, you think you're reading a book in order to make somebody else happy or to get someone off your back, then you're going to be quite resentful in that activity. You're not going to be putting your utmost energy into it, and it's going to be quite energy sapping. If, however, you say, I'm going to read this because I want to skill myself up, I want to have more power and capacity so that one day I can make choices that determine my own life consequences, then it becomes so much more about you, and therefore much more you're much more incentivized to do it and to get to a position of increased skill and increased power. So I think that's another way of delaying gratification in a very effective manner, because all of a sudden you're thinking, well, this is all about me, and I am delaying gratification. I will be gratified by what happens at the end of this path. I'm not just doing it for somebody else's benefit, I'm doing it for my benefit. And I think those two particular techniques can help with the problem of how to sustain effort over a long period of time, which is what it takes to be competitive at universities like this. Anyway, I hope this is helpful. As ever, do please let me know in the comments if you'd like me to cover anything in particular, and thank you so much for watching. All the best. Bye.